All right. Oh, yeah, there I am. Okay. So we celebrate over Kai this morning being baptized. That's awesome. New eternal family member. But for those online who are joining us, class has actually begun, but we're celebrating Kai. So as the room empties out, we'll get going. How are you?
Oh,
You good?
yeah, we have quite a good crowd this morning, and with this baptism, a lot of excitement going on, and so the auditorium is gradually clearing out. So, let me start by talking about a couple of different things.
All right.
We've done a lot of praying this morning.
He turned it off up there. That's good.
And which is really, really a good thing. We all have special things to pray about. Okay.
He's getting it. Ken's getting you taken care of.
I have a grandson who flew out this morning to go to Dominican Republic to a group of his high school friends from Grace Academy are doing some building for at a youth camp for boys and girls for the next 5 days, and so they flew out there. I didn't know he was joking. I thought he was saying that he was a little bit afraid of flying over the water, but he was just teasing me. And I reminded him of the captain that landed in the harbor when we came back from Israel one year, the one they made the movie about. And we flew over looking down on the water. There, the plane was in the water. We couldn't see it because it had turned. It was 5:15, 5:30 in New York City. We couldn't see it, but we could see all the lights. And when the plane landed, we had 425 people on the plane. When it landed, about 100 cell phones went off immediately. And but anyway, so we've been praying for Duncan and his group there in Dominican Republic. And there's just so many people to pray for. And so I think I'll just go ahead and start with a prayer.
Perfect.
Gracious Father, we don't always know how to pray, but we do know to whom to pray, and we do know that you will answer us in one way or another to our benefit. Again, we thank you for the opportunity to teach the auditorium class and the ones that are online with us, because you have left us so many meaningful records that help us also to know how to relate to you. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Okay, Stan?
So we're going to finish Hagar, and then we're going to move into Ruth. And we almost could have finished Hagar last week, but we didn't want to rush it towards the end. And for a new little variable for us is the clock is now set to the proper time. So it keeps you on your toes up here. But we looked at Hagar last week. We talked about the angel of the Lord visiting her. We talked about her naming Yahweh, which is something that no one else does throughout the entire Hebrew Bible. Really some stuff that, well, Dr. Cloud and I find that we spend way more hours preparing for this class than we thought we would, to go and try to mine the things that are obscure and the things that do bring the other facets and angles to these stories, so that we don't just get up here and repeat something to you that you already know, or just for you to hear it again. And so Hagar, the name she gives to Yahweh is El Roi, E-L-R-O-I in English. And it's because she says it's the God who sees her. But then the text also tells us that God opens her eyes, and she saw as well. And she saw a well of water. And it's interesting, I couldn't get it in English. I saw a Spanish cartoon just yesterday that showed Jesus standing above the ground, and there's a well next to him, and you can see the well water's way down at the bottom. But the well that's connected underneath Jesus, like a spire of water, is up right to his feet underneath the ground. is all in the water table, all underneath the ground. And I thought, man, I wish I knew what that said, because I couldn't read it in Spanish. But it said something to the effect of, there's the living water that comes from God, that is a eternal source and everlasting, compared to what we would think of at a well. But in this case, this is a well that keeps them from dying, because they're in the wilderness, and she had all but given up on Ishmael and just basically casted him to the side, we discussed, for just letting him die, because that's what she figured the future for them was. But we contrasted that with the Samaritan woman at the well in John 4, and here's a example in the Old Testament of something very similar with Hagar. And so this is the account of Abraham's son Ishmael, whom Hagar, the Egyptian, Sarah's servant, bore to Abraham. Last week, I had somebody contact me to get me to ask you, are the descendants of Ishmael the Palestinians? And I said I would make sure that we asked you.
Well, it's a little bit of a complicated question, but basically, yes.
That's what I said, but
Yeah.
I thought you'd have a longer answer than mine, because, you know.
Well, you only say that because it's true. But clearly, Ishmael, that's the branch that the Arabs are in, and that branch of the Semitic peoples are in that branch. So the simple answer is yes.
Awesome. So Hagar represents the line of Abraham that does not remain within Judaism, which is exactly what Dr. Cloud is referring to. And in the early church, she often represents the Jews who chose not to believe in Jesus. So you can see how this animosity that we were looking at last week between Sarah giving the glare to Hagar, because now Sarah has Isaac. And so that whole plan of having a child with Abraham with Hagar didn't look so attractive once Sarah had her own son. And then there was the text telling us that maybe the sons were mockingly joking with each other. We don't really know exactly what all was going on there. But it extends all the way to today. Because if we have Jewish people who don't believe in Jesus, predominantly they represent the Ishmaelites. Fair? In Galatians 4:21 through 31, Paul compares Hagar, who he calls the mother of the son of the flesh, and Sarah, who he calls the mother of the son of the promise. So there again, in the first century, we see the animosity between the two groups, and in 2023, we still see it. Paul's audience in Galatia understands themselves as descendants of Sarah. The descendants of Hagar are to be driven from the community, which is just unfortunate that we can't heal that rift that's between the people. This exacerbates negative images of Hagar, as well as tensions between Jews and early Christians, and still so today. They still have fighting over there going on for some reasons that we've just mentioned here.
Yeah, there are, of course, some Arabs and some descendants of Ishmael that have become Christians. And on the last trip, we had 2 busloads of people, 2019 and 20, and one of the guys was an Arab Christian, and 6'9", second tallest guy in Israel, and spoke about Jesus every day, all the time. Name was Murad.
6'9", that's tall. So Hagar's struggle is alive today. The low-born, that's an interesting term, low-born, hard-working domestic laborer, used and misused and cast out by her employers, the single mother abandoned by her father of her child, the foreigner and the refugee far from her native land, desperately trying to survive, frantic in her maternal concern for the safety of her child. This Hagar we have met many times, unfortunately, even today. And Jesus loves them the same as he loves us. Hence the angel of the Lord going to Hagar and providing all that we've looked at this story. That is even if we can't dive into all the little nuances of that, let's just say that if you go back and read the Exodus, and you look at what's described in the Exodus, God says to Moses, I will send my angel ahead of you, and I will guide you. And the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire, all the things that are being done to protect those people are equated to, or at least associated with, the angel of the Lord. And the angel of the Lord goes to Hagar. So that last statement, Jesus loves them the same as he loves us, is 100% true. Ruth, would you like to begin, Ruth? That's
Okay.
your picture that you
All
that
right.
you found.
Yeah, the way we put these lessons together is we start out and we have structured the story in our minds, and we look for pictures, and then we shift them around, and we try to get better pictures. Like Stan hasn't had a chance to say, I've been working on Elijah, which is coming up after Ruth, and just like he hasn't seen it yet. He's got it. I sent it to him late last night, and we'll start working on it this week. But there are 4 different shots of Elijah going up in the chariot, and so we'll try to pick out the best water too. And so that's what we do. Of course, so we do our best to put them in order that make sense to you. So anyway, here's Ruth, a wonderful, wonderful story. And
A Moabite woman.
a Moabite
Somebody that they weren't supposed to even interact with.
woman. Right. And yet she goes back to Abraham also. She goes back to Abraham's family, goes back to Lot and into that family. And we're here, basically, there's just so many things about this story that we want to bring out. We don't want to tell you the same thing that you've heard, that we have to touch on it. But here's a story that starts out in a very tragic way after Naomi goes into the land of Moab. She ends up, and we're going to show you a map in just a second.
And they're widowed.
She goes with her husband and her and 2 sons, and the 2 sons marry Moabite women. But the father's going to die. Naomi's husband's going to die, and the 2 boys are going to die, leaving this woman with these 2 daughters-in-law. And so, but to stop and just, you want to talk about the word, Ruth?
Sure.
Go ahead.
So we through our Hebrew studies often find that names mean something. Nowadays, unfortunately, and hopefully this doesn't apply to anybody in here and I have to stick my shoe in my mouth, but sometimes names are just chosen from whatever, television, cartoon character, somebody reminds somebody of, whatever. But at this time, names weren't decided upon about how they sounded. They were decided either by family origins, or most commonly they were decided by what the name means. And oftentimes the names connect to Yahweh somehow. So the name Ruth occurs in the Bible only in relation to the main character of this book, which is also interesting. I mean, we talk about all the common names, like there were more than one Jesus, there was more than one James, there was more than one John, and there's more than one Saul. But there's not more than one Ruth. And so outside of this book, the name occurs only in Matthew 1, verse 5, which of course is applicable to her, so it's the same person. In the genealogy of Jesus, which we heard just a few weeks ago, 5 weeks ago to be exact. Ruth is related to the word meaning friendship, which didn't have all the vowels, but I guess that would be uat, right? Ru, that's close. The root of this word is well attested in the Old Testament and variously means neighbor, friend, or female companion. And so that would make a lot of sense with what you just said about Naomi, because Ruth is Naomi's female companion.
Correct.
The book of Ruth is a Hebrew short story. And I'm going to let you have it because you started with chapter 1 and gave us little overviews. But it's only 4 chapters long, and it's set in the time of the Judges, circa 1030 to 1010 BC, as related to us in Ruth chapter 1, verse 1.
So this tells us that they left for Moab, which is, as you'll see, I think the map's coming up.
Yeah, right here.
Here's the map right here.
You didn't want to go over Eli Melech, though?
Yeah, I was going to come back to that.
Okay, all right.
So the husband's name, a lot of these names, a word like, as Stan was explaining how we got our names, my mother named me Rodney because she had just come from a movie where the guy was named Rodney that she liked in the movie. So is named Rodney, and so my dad named me the middle name Eugene, which means well born. It's an interesting name, but anyway, I didn't like Rodney. I liked Rod. When I was a young man, Rodney was kind of a sissy person in the movies, and Rod was the strong person. So
I'm going for my shoe, by the way.
but a lot of times the name, like in the book of Jonah, Jonah means a dove. But what is Jonah in the story? He's a hawk. He wants the Assyrians wiped out. So people didn't always live up to the name that they had. An interesting thing happened when I was tracing the name Rodney and found out that one definition is infamous. And so I avoided that one. And then I was looking up McLeod. McLeod, I knew it meant son of cloud, but it actually has two spellings. And one of the name means son of a person named Cloud. The other name means son of ugly. And so somebody gave it the one that's MacLeod. It looks like MacLeod. They pronounced it McLeod. So names, in our case, are not as meaningful as most the biblical names are there because some event happened. God heard somebody. And here's the name with Melech in it.
The Eli Melech. So something king.
Yeah, my God is king is one of the ways to interpret that. Again, showing the word Melech, you actually see it in Abimelech, there's Ahimelech, there's several names, but the one you know the most is Melchizedek. His name in Hebrew is Melchizedek, king of righteousness. So, but anyway, they go to Moab, and we don't know which direction they took, but this was the normal direction that you would take, keeping you away from some of the desert areas. And so you cross there. This is almost exactly where we cross when we go from Israel over to Jordan, if we have a day or two or three in Jordan here. And then you go southward, and you can see where Moab is.
So by the scale of miles there, I'm guessing that's about 70 miles?
Yeah, it's that sounds like a good guess. From Jerusalem to Heshbon is something like 45, 50 miles. So that would be a good guess on your part. So this gives us at least an idea. They went from the western side of the Dead Sea to the eastern side.
So there's your disappointingly, Eli Melech died, and two sons married Moabite women, Oprah and Ruth.
And I left out the two male names just to
Orpah.
keep it from being so complicated. Right, so, and of course, one of these ladies is not well known. Orpah is not well known because she decides not to go back into to Judah with Naomi. So, let's go ahead and go to the next slide.
Helps if I hit the right button.
Anyway, of course, it finally ends up being Ruth is going back home to the area of Bethlehem, and she wants the two girls to stay there. She thinks that's where they really ought to stay, but Ruth just pleads and begs and puts pressure. So I decided to put the message in here, and so I kind of like the way that they did it. Don't force me to leave you. Don't make me go home. Where you go, I go, and where you live, I live. Your people are my people. Your God is my God. Where you die, I'll die, and that's where I'll be buried. So help me, God. That's the way the message did it. Not even death itself is going to come between us. Now, that's probably the most famous statement in the whole book of Ruth.
And one of the most quoted things in weddings.
One of the most quoted things?
In wedding ceremonies.
In wedding ceremonies, that's true. That is, I'd forgotten about that. I don't think we quoted that 61 years ago in our wedding, but anyway, it is quoted a lot, and it.
Well, if you think about it, I mean, it's interesting what all scripture bits are in there, especially the part that says that a spouse can be saved through the other spouse. So my God will be your God. You'll live where I live. I'll die where you die. I'll be buried where you're buried. And even death itself won't come between us.
Right.
That's fascinating.
Right. I watched a movie called The Biblical Story of Ruth. I happened to find it on YouTube, and it was horrible because they made up so many things that just to make the story what they thought was better. But anyway, found this nice shot. You see the other lady going away on the far left-hand side, and there is Ruth pleading with Naomi to let me go, with you.
So Orpha leaves and Naomi goes. And Ruth goes. You think that's pretty accurate there in the picture of the age difference between Naomi and Ruth?
I would think so.
Okay.
I would think so. We're going to try to mention some things later on when things start going well that I think we're going to take you back to Moab just for a thought near the end. Anyway, it's interesting how sometimes people either change their names. You take in the story of David, when he helps out this rich guy down the south, Abigail's husband, and he goes to him and says, we protected your flocks and everything, and he says, should I be wanting a little reward for it, or wanting to be involved in the feast? And he said, slaves are always running away from their masters, and he's really, really nasty. So David gets upset and tells his men to strap on their swords. We're going to take care of this guy. And fortunately, Abigail intercedes and brings things to him. But one of the servants says to Abigail, well, our master, his name means harsh, crude. And so now no mama is going to give your baby the name harsh or crude. So you probably earned that name. So a lot of people have names that attached to them that they've earned. And anyway, so that becomes very, very significant. Here, they go to town, the people greet her, they're excited to see Naomi, haven't seen her in a long time, and her name means pleasant or something of that nature. And so she says, no, don't call me, things being pleasant, call me bitterness. And so she throws that name out there to them.
Which we know there's a place in the story of Exodus that's named that too.
Right.
With a similar spelling, not
right.
Mara, but
right. Yeah, and it's a related word. It's a cognate word.
All right. So Boaz, chapter 2, he's widowed, right?
He's what?
He's widowed, right?
Yeah.
He's a widower. Correct?
Well, actually, the text doesn't tell us much about Boaz from that standpoint. But he is a relative of Naomi's dead husband. And so being a relative, going into the different marriage laws they had, he had an opportunity to, as we'll tell you here, let's see. Yeah, it does say he was a man of noble character, so we know he's a strong believer in God. We know he's apparently a very good person. And so they get settled there in the city. In the movie, they do not treat Ruth very well at all. The movie that they made up, they are nasty toward Ruth because she's a Moabite and all that. But anyway, the text doesn't say anything like that. What the text says is Boaz sees how Ruth treats Naomi and how much Naomi loves Ruth. He sees that and he brags on her. But anyway, she decides, let me go into the fields and let us get something. There were rules about what to do if somebody came in, and the poor people, for example, people in need. They could glean in the fields. And so she asked if she could do that. And of course, the way we put it here was
Sorry.
that she caught the eye of Boaz.
And he treated her with great kindness
Right.
compared to the others from
And
your
he
movie.
will lately, eventually would say to her, I've seen how you treated your mother, how you treat your mother-in-law. I'm sorry, go ahead. You
No,
started.
no, I said compared to how they portrayed her being treated in your movie, was that
Right.
he treated her with great kindness.
Right.
So then she goes home to her mother-in-law, and Naomi tells her that Boaz is a near kinsman, so near a close relative who could possibly be in a position to redeem or vindicate a relative. Explain that to us. Redeem from what?
Yeah, what happened, of course, when people died in the family, you could actually marry into the family, and you could help solve problems. It was a broader law than we usually think about it. But anyway, he's in a position, but he's not in the top position. He's in a position to help the family, but he can't really claim Ruth because there's another kinsman who is closer relative, and so we'll have to work around that. But anyway, the fact he's a near kinsman, Naomi, we don't know what she was thinking in her mind, but we have an idea.
But is that redemption there like the women without a husband would be out of society, basically? And because there was also a law, which I'm assuming we're referencing in Leviticus, where if a brother died, the other brother has the right to marry that brother's
Right.
wife.
Right.
Is it a similar situation that they're suggesting, that she can be redeemed because he's related and then he brings her back to a status that she won't have unless she's not married?
Yeah, basically, there's actually some fringe benefits that are not spelled out in detail for us.
Gotcha.
Now, this is from the movie. This was a good scene. There were a couple of good scenes in the movie, but the guy on the left, you may recognize him. He played in a lot of movies, usually not the main character, but anyway, he does a good job here. And
Stuart Whitman.
Yeah, Stuart Whitman, and you may remember he was in the movie. I think it's called. It's on the tip of my tongue with John Wayne. But anyway, it's too much detail there. But anyway, he does a good job, and the young lady playing Ruth does a good job, and the lady, Naomi, is a very, very sweet lady. This was a good scene from the movie, so I thought I would. There's more than one movie out on this, I found out. So Naomi has a plan, and she talks about the fact that you've been working with the servant girls of a relative of ours, and again, a lot of people have tried to come up with different things here and make something out of it. It's not, but there was some traditions, and we don't always know every tradition, but some traditions in such a way that she more or less, let's just say, she could make a proposal or make herself available, and without anything being dirty here.
But interestingly, he's going winnowing of barley on the threshing floor. So he's working. He's going to be having dust flying in the air and separating the chaff from the barley part you can harvest, right? And she's putting on perfume and going down to the job site.
There's something that is really doesn't come out in the English translations. Boaz has his fields divided among some special servants, and that you've heard us use the word Na'ar, N-A-A-R, a few times. For example, when David fought Goliath, he had already been made the king's armor bearer, so he was the royal armor bearer of Saul, and he was going back and forth from Bethlehem to Gibeah, the capital, to be training. And then chapter 17, when he actually fights Goliath, Saul says to him, the English translation says, "You're only a youth." No, that's not what they mean. You're only the royal armor bearer. Saul had made him his armor bearer in chapter 16 when David went to try out to be the royal musician. and he made him his armor bearer. And it already said he was a man of war, a man of valor. And in 1 Samuel 14:52, it said every time Saul saw somebody like that, he added him to his staff. So he makes David at least one of his armor bearers. And David's been going back and forth training. Now, David comes to the battlefield to bring things to his 3 older brothers who are soldiers. And Saul hears about the boasting. And so Saul calls him into his tent and says, well, I know you want to go and fight him, but you're only the royal armor bearer. Not because you're young and small. David is not small. In chapter 16, when the staff members are talking to Saul saying, we need to find a musician to play for you. And one of them says, I know a guy in Bethlehem. He is a man of war, a man of valor. He speaks very well. He plays the instrument extremely well. He's of good form. It's exactly the same idiom used when Potiphar sees Joseph. And the Jewish translation that was made in 1960s or so says that she looked upon Joseph because he was well built and handsome, is what the Jewish version says. So this word shows you that David is probably something like 18, 19 years old.
So does it apply here to Boaz or to Ruth?
So it applies to both.
To both, that's what I thought you were going to say.
So what happens is, it tells us here that Boaz has divided up his fields and put naars over the fields. That these are, the word actually, we have a student getting ready to write his doctoral dissertation on the word naar. And basically, the word is, we're going to probably prove the word means status. And so these young men are over his fields. And he says to the young men, take care of her. Now, he says, take care of the na'arah. She is a female na'ar. And if we don't get to it today, I'll go ahead and jump to it. Anyway, make sure that, let's go ahead right now and do it. I see the excitement on your faces. In the book of 1 Samuel, when David becomes an outlaw and is gathered around him, first 400, then 600 men who are running away from government, it says that David was very concerned about what Saul would do to his mother and father. So he takes his mother and father over to Moab and leaves them with the king of Moab. Now, if Ruth was a person of status, and that's one thing the movie did do a pretty good job on. They put her in a situation where she was connected to the royal family. Now, I don't know if they knew that or they just did that to enhance the story. But anyway, it says, because what is the relationship? Well, Ruth is the great-grandmother of David and the grandmother of Jesse. And so here David takes them, his mother and father, to the king of Moab, and he's going to protect them while David is running around as an outlaw. So anyway, I think she was of some kind of royal status. We don't know what, but why would you take, her to the king of Moab unless she had some kind of connection there? So that means that Obed is going to be born to Ruth. He will be half Moabite. And then Jesse then will be a fourth Moabite, and David will be an eighth Moabite. And
Jesus will be some percentage of Moabite.
Yeah, and as Stan said when he did the Matthew study, he shows you the women in the line there, and 3 of the 4 for sure are foreigners. Rahab is a Canaanite. Tamar is a Canaanite. Bathsheba, we're not sure. She's married to a Hittite, is all. We don't know fully her situation. And Ruth is a Moabite. So you have women in the genealogy of Jesus that are not Jewish, which is interesting.
So Boaz lies down, and Naomi tells her, note the place where he lies, and then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will explain to you what you should do. You want to extrapolate that for us?
Well, I think this was a custom in which she is telling him, she is making herself available to him, not from the standpoint of sexuality, but from the standpoint of matrimony. And he's going to respond to that, as you will see.
So then we're suggesting that uncovering his feet here is actually uncovering his feet.
Yeah, and lying down next to him. And there's people have tried to make something dirty out of it. There's not anything dirty at all with it.
And so around midnight, he's startled because there she is lying at his feet.
Right. And then when she explains herself to him, and then the next morning they're going to get up. Boaz is going to make his way into town. Anyway, she tells who she is, and spread the coat of your garment over me, for you are a kinsman redeemer. You fall in that category. But he wasn't the closest kinsman redeemer. There was another person in the way.
Yet kinsman redeemer has also been applied to God.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about that.
Interesting label there. Like, because there's family connection, right? And so God being the creator of all humanity, there would be family connection.
Right.
And so that's why he's called that.
Anyway, Boaz explains, here's the problem. There is a closer relative that has the right before I have the right, but it was a little bit complicated how we don't totally understand it. We know roughly what they're talking about.
First right of refusal to marry her, right?
Correct.
And this other man did not want to marry Ruth. Boaz declared he would happily do so if that was the case.
Right. And he would have to pass up with witnesses to make sure that this is all good. And then a little story I'm going to tell you about.
The 6 measures of grain.
Pardon me?
The 6 measures of grain to take back as a pledge.
Oh.
Must have been very valuable grain.
Right.
To take that to Naomi, right?
Right, yeah. And this is kind of to me, I take this to be a pledge. He's making a pledge. And so Ruth goes back home to Naomi, bringing this. So we had a picture. Actually, I had a couple. Then we decided just to use this one picture. But she's extremely happy with what she got to bring back. Remember, they're struggling to make ends meet.
And yet, I would think all I was really trying to suggest is it's probably a symbolic gesture more so than just the grain, right? It probably means to provide for, to have sustenance and all that, and not just the monetary value of whatever that amount of grain was.
You speak truth. Okay. Now this is interesting. We had a young man that went to church, was in our youth group, that our youth group had converted. He was just out floating out the world. They knew him, I guess, at school. I'm going to have a Troy O'Donohoe, I believe, Troy O'Donohoe. And so Troy started coming to our youth meetings. I was doing some things with the youth also, and there were like 5 young people here that were going to Lipscomb, and 3 of them were in my Bible class, my freshman Bible class, and Troy and some other people. And so Troy became my assistant. They let us have a secretary to work a couple hours a day, or an assistant to help with a gopher and be like, something like that. And so Troy took Hebrew, and Troy did not do well. He started out in the fall term, he squeezed out a C. But he went to Israel with me in December and roomed with me. And he came back and he was on fire. And he started studying his Hebrew, and he made a B in winter quarter, but he was coming strong. And I had 2 of the best students I'd ever had, a boy, a young man, and a young woman in the class. And in the spring term, he passed both of them up with 2 weeks to go. Now, I think he let his other grades go down. He was studying Hebrew all the time. He just became infatuated. So the term was over. We met at A this time, and we had summer, and we did the book of Ruth. And on a test over Ruth, I asked the question about the scene right here. There is a word, hene, that I spoke on at the Lanier Theological Library about 4 years ago. We had a Hebrew paddle there, and anyway, in Houston. And anyway, I lectured on hene. Hene means like Moses, suddenly there's a fire next to him. Or it always meant putting special attention on something. And I'd lectured on that quite a bit. So then there was another word that's hard to translate that means such and such a person. Well, anyway, in chapter 4, I had them translate this and exegete, and Troy said, and Boaz went to the city gate. And holy cow, the kinsman redeemer was coming through the gate. That is, behold, it said, the Hebrew says, behold, so he said, holy cow, the kinsman redeemer was coming through the gate. And he said to him, hey, dude, come over here, I need to talk to you. And Harvey Floyd, one of my best friends at Lipscomb, he laughed for days. He said, he really did understand that. So when I spoke I used that example in the library, in the lecture I gave in the library on Hebrew. And they seemed to like that. And the next day, I'm going into the chapel. We're going in for a meeting. And one of the people that heard me the day before said, holy cow, Dr. Cloud's going into the chapel. So, but anyway, it showed that he really grasped it. But he goes there and is fortunate that the kinsman redeemer appeared. All right, go ahead. Let's see.
So there's the gate.
So I found that cartoon at the gate there, and again, I see our time.
We got to get to Donna's cartoon, so we got to pick up the pace here just a little bit. So they followed a strange custom involving a shoe, whereby a man plucked off his shoe and handed it to his neighbor if he wished to forego his claim to something.
Go ahead.
You're gonna explain that to us more than that, or not?
No, so I have a couple of shots here.
Yeah, it was kind of a test or testimony in Israel in those days, a legal ritual which sealed the deal. So if you got a shoe, then it was non-negotiable. It was a done deal.
And have witnesses and all of this, and so that's what happens in these next few slides.
Yeah, so the other man, whoever the other man was, who was closer to the right and had the first right of refusal to marry Ruth, he takes off his shoe and he gives it to Boaz, making it clear that he had relinquished all claim to Ruth or her dead father-in-law's land. So not only her, but her inheritance that she would get. This guy, by giving his shoe, is saying, you can have both. Marrying Ruth would damage his inheritance from his father, presumably from marrying a Moabite foreigner, so he might have had more inheritance that he was going to get anyway. And so he's basically saying, I don't want yours over mine. And so he declines. And Boaz announced that he would marry Ruth. And so he does. And once married, Ruth had a son named Obed, who in turn had a son named Jesse, who himself had a son named David, which Dr. Cloud went over a little while ago. So Ruth and Boaz's son would be the grandfather of King David, so Jesse's dad. There's the family tree, which comes from Ruth 4:21 through 22, Ruth and Boaz, Obed, Jesse, David, Jesus, which we have alluded to this morning in all of our little comments up here. And so you wanted to just restate.
Yeah, this is what I threw in earlier, that it has to be, there had to be some connection with Ruth and the royal family, because the word na'ara is used of her, and then David taking his parents, Jesse being the grandson. So.
Yeah. So to end it, and Donna, this is Dr. Cloud's, not mine, so I'm not taking credit for it. He said, what do you think about this cartoon? Should we put it in? I said, yeah, we should put it in. So it says, well, Boaz, the land is tempting, but I'll have to pass on a wife and a loss of inheritance. Cool, I get all of that and one of your sandals. This is my lucky day. And then this person down here says, what is it with these people and feet? So, see you next week. We'll talk about Elijah.